The rush-hour chaos of Grand Central Station carried its own rhythm. A pounding, impatient heartbeat made of footsteps, rolling suitcases, half-heard phone calls, and the distant metallic groan of arriving trains. Commuters surged like a restless tide, each face buried in its own urgency. Few noticed the wiry by Courier slipping through the crowd, his delivery bag hanging from one shoulder, his jacket worn thin by wind and rain. Ethan Cole was just another invisible worker in the city's bloodstream. Hustling, overlooked, expendable, he kept his head down, dodging elbows, scanning for platform signs. A late delivery meant less pay, and less pay meant another bill unpaid. But in that blur of movement, Ethan's focus faltered. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted him. A boy no older than 15, standing rigid at the very edge of platform 23. The kid's hands shook violently, his breaths coming in short, ragged gasps. The crowd flowed around him without stopping, as if his panic were an inconvenience no one had time for. Ethan slowed. The boy's eyes were wide, locked on the dark tunnel ahead. A train horn wailed in the distance, its rumble swelling closer. Ethan's gut twisted. He knew that look. Frozen, terrified, seconds from collapse in the worst possible place. "Sir, move along." A transit guard barked behind him, jolting Ethan. "Don't get involved." But his feet didn't obey. His body remembered something his mind had buried, the split-second instincts from another life years ago, when he had been a promising sprinter with Olympic trials in sight. That was before the injury, before delivery jobs, before the grind of single fatherhood. Yet the old reflex sparked alive as the train's lights blazed in the tunnel. The boy swayed. One step too far and Ethan dropped his delivery bag, vaulted the waist-high barrier in a fluid motion that startled even him, and landed hard on the platform. The crowd gasped. A woman screamed. The guard shouted, "Hey, get back!" But Ethan was already crouched low, just feet from the boy. He raised both hands slowly, palms open. His voice cut through the chaos, calm but firm. "Hey, you're okay. I've got you. Just breathe with me, all right? Look at me." The boy's glassy eyes flicked toward him, unfocused. The roar of the train swelled. Ethan's heart hammered, but his voice held steady. He tapped 2 fingers against his chest, setting a rhythm. "In and out. With me. In and out." He exaggerated each breath, letting the boy mirror the cadence. Years ago, his coach had drilled the same grounding ritual before every race. Calm the body, calm the mind. The boy's shoulders jerked, then eased. His breathing faltered, then found the rhythm. The train screamed into the station, brakes shrieking, wind tearing at coats and newspapers. For a moment it seemed inevitable. The boy tipping toward the tracks. Ethan lunged, wrapping an arm around the boy's chest, steady but firm, pulling him back step by step until they stood against the safety line. The train thundered past, a blur of silver and steel. The rush of air lashed Ethan's face, but he didn't let go. He held the boy upright, repeating the rhythm. In, out, in, out. When the train screeched to a halt, the boy sagged against him, breath shaky but steady. The crowd erupted shouts, claps, angry scolding, stunned silence. The guard shoved through, red-faced and livid. "You could have gotten yourself killed. What were you thinking?" Ethan stood, still holding the boy. His voice came quiet, worn. "I was thinking he needed someone to stop the world for a second." What Ethan didn't see, what almost no one noticed, was the woman at the edge of the crowd, standing motionless in her tailored navy suit. Her eyes, sharp from years of cross-examining criminals, were wide with something rare: vulnerability. Assistant District Attorney Margaret Hale had spent months trying to reach her son after his father's death, after the spiral of panic attacks and silence. Therapists, medications, endless consultations. None of it had broken through. But this stranger, this courier with frayed shoes and a sweat-stained jacket, had done in seconds what specialists could not. She didn't step forward yet, not while the crowd swirled. She only watched, lips parted in shock, as Ethan crouched again to meet her son's eyes, speaking softly so no one else could hear. And for the first time in months, the boy nodded. The crowd gradually thinned, the storm of voices fading into murmurs and half-curious glances. For most commuters, the incident had already dissolved into another fragment of New York chaos, something to retell at the office, exaggerated over morning coffee. But for Ethan, it wasn't background noise. His arm remained steady around the boy, Daniel, whose trembling had not fully eased. The transit guard huffed nearby, scribbling onto his notepad. "You'll be hearing from us?" he snapped, jabbing the air with his pen. This was reckless interference. Ethan didn't look at him. His focus was fixed on the boy, crouched against the wall like a cornered animal. The train's metallic echo was fading, but its shadow lingered in Daniel's wide eyes. Ethan softened his tone. "Hey, Daniel, right?" The boy flinched at his own name, then gave a small nod. "Okay," Ethan said, lowering his voice further, the way he spoke to his daughter after nightmares. "Here's what we're gonna do. Forget trains, crowds, noise. Just me and you. Count with me. 1, 2, 3, breathe." He demonstrated, slow and steady, tapping his chest. Daniel's breathing began to sink, the jagged edges smoothing with each count. A fragile spark of control flickered back into the boy's posture. Ethan knew this moment, the narrow window when panic hadn't won, when someone still had a chance to hold on, when Daniel finally whispered, 4. Barely audible, Ethan smiled. "That's it. You're stronger than you think." A hush settled across the platform. The guard had stopped writing. Even strangers waiting for the next train watched in silence as the boy inched toward com.it. Was then Margaret finally stepped forward. The sharp click of her heels against the concrete cut the air. Ethan looked up, instinctively bracing for reprimand, another authority figure ready to tell him what he shouldn't have done. But Margaret didn't glance at him first. She crouched beside her son, brushing his damp hair from his forehead. "Danny," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Sweetheart, I'm here." Daniel blinked, caught between collapse and composure. He didn't lean in, but he didn't pull away. His eyes drifted back toward Ethan, searching for the rhythm, the anchor. And in that moment, Margaret realized what had just happened. A man she didn't know, in scuffed sneakers and Courier gear, had reached her son in a way she hadn't been able to for months. She swallowed hard, her throat tightening. Is he okay?" she asked, her voice steadier now, directed at Ethan. "He will be," Ethan said gently, standing to give her space. "He just needed someone to match his pace. Panic feeds on speed. You slow it down, it loses power." Margaret blinked. That wasn't something she had heard from therapists or doctors. It was simple, raw, human. "And you? How did you know to do that?" Ethan shifted awkwardly, suddenly aware of the onlookers, the guard, the conductor watching from the cabin window. His past wasn't something he advertised. "Old habit," he muttered. "I used to run track. Breathing's everything when you're close to breaking." Margaret studied him, trying to reconcile the image. Delivery man, ex-athlete, rescuer of her son. No polished resume, no framed diplomas. Just instinct. The guard finally cleared his throat, stepping forward with forced authority. "Ma'am, if this is your child, you should know this man broke safety protocol. Jumped barriers. Could have caused." Margaret rose to her full height, her presence slipping into place like armor. She fixed the guard with a glare sharp enough to silence a courtroom. "Officer, are you suggesting that saving my son's life was an inconvenience?" The guard's jaw tightened, but no words followed. He stepped back. Margaret turned to Ethan, her tone softening. "Mr. Cole. Ethan Cole." She nodded slowly. "Mr. Cole, I don't know how to thank you. Daniel hasn't—" She glanced at her son, then lowered her voice. "He hasn't responded to anyone like that. Not to me. Not to professionals. But you—" Ethan shook his head, lifting his bag from the floor. "Don't thank me. Just be there when he needs someone to slow the world down." For a moment, their eyes held, hers, sharp yet softened by hope. His tired and guarded, but honest. Daniel tugged at his mother's sleeve, whispering something only she could hear. She bent quickly, nodding, her eyes wet. When she looked back at Ethan, her voice was steadier. "He wants to see you again." Ethan froze. The words landed heavier than they should. He was already late on a delivery, already behind on rent, already stretched thin. Another family's struggles weren't part of the plan. And yet, how could he look into Daniel's pleading eyes and say no? "I don't know," Ethan began, rubbing the back of his neck. "I've got my own kid at home. My schedule." Margaret cut him off, her tone firm but not unkind. "Mr. Cole, I'll compensate you. Whatever you make on deliveries, I'll triple it. All I ask is that you spend time with him. No therapists, no pressure. Just whatever it was you did today." Ethan hesitated. Money was tempting, but this wasn't about that. He pictured his daughter, Emily, waiting at their kitchen table between his shifts. He thought of the weight kids carried, unseen by adults. He looked at Daniel, fragile but no longer drowning, and exhaled. "One condition," Ethan said at last. "No cameras. No people watching over his shoulder. If I do this, it's just me and him. Otherwise, it won't work." Margaret blinked at the firmness in his tone, then nodded. "Agreed." The next train pulled in, doors sliding open. Commuters surged forward, restoring the rhythm of the station. But for three people, Ethan, Daniel, and Margaret, something had shifted as Ethan walked them toward the exit. His delivery forgotten. The city's chaos buzzed around them. He had no idea what he was stepping into, no idea how this moment would unfold into something larger than himself. All he knew was that for the first time in a long time, someone had seen him not as invisible, but as necessary, and for Daniel, still gripping Ethan's sleeve as they climbed the stairs, the world suddenly felt a little less heavy. Margaret Hale was not accustomed to hesitation. In court, in negotiations, even in the rarefied circles of Manhattan's elite, she spoke with a crisp finality that left little room for opposition. Yet when she stood outside Ethan Cole's apartment door 2 nights later, her knuckles hovered midair, pausing over the peeling paint. She wasn't used to knocking on doors like this, doors in buildings with flickering hallway lights and the faint smell of last night's fried food clinging to the walls. But Daniel had asked. Not once. Every night since the train station, her son had whispered before bed, "Can I see him again?" And for the first time in months, he had slept without waking in terror. That was enough to drive Margaret here, expensive heels clicking against the warped floorboards. The door opened before she could summon her courage. Ethan stood there, still in his Courier jacket, hair damp from the drizzle outside. He looked surprised, then wary. "Ms. Hale." She straightened, smoothing her coat sleeve. "It's Margaret. May I come in?" Inside, the apartment was small but tidy. Stacks of delivery slips lined the counter. A bike helmet hung from a hook by the door. At the kitchen table sat a girl of about 10, hunched over a math workbook, pencil tapping rhythmically. She looked up at the stranger with cautious curiosity. "This is Emily," Ethan said, his tone softer when he spoke her name. "My daughter." Emily gave a polite nod, then returned to her numbers, though her eyes flicked up now and then. Margaret noticed the resemblance, the same guarded, perceptive gaze as her father. "I didn't mean to intrude," Margaret began, adjusting the bag in her hands. "Daniel hasn't stopped asking about you. I thought, perhaps you and Emily might join us for dinner tomorrow night. At my home. Something simple." Ethan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Simple? In your world, I doubt anything's simple." There was no malice in his words, just truth. Margaret sighed, conceding. "Fair enough. But it doesn't have to be complicated. Just a meal. Daniel needs normal." Ethan glanced at Emily, who was listening now, her pencil stilled. She tilted her head, waiting. He rubbed the back of his neck. "All right, we'll come." The following evening, their worlds collided in a penthouse overlooking Central Park. Margaret's home was all glass and steel, sleek lines and silent hallways that felt more like a museum than a residence. Emily clung to her father, wide-eyed. "Dad, this place is huge." Daniel waited in the dining room, fidgeting with a napkin. When his eyes found Ethan, They lit with recognition. He didn't rush forward, but he stood taller, as if Ethan's presence steadied him. Dinner was not the stiff affair Ethan had expected. Margaret had kept her word. Pasta, salad, fresh bread. Nothing extravagant, no staff hovering. Just 4 people at a table. Emily, shy at first, began talking about her school art project. Daniel listened intently, his fork forgotten, until Emily nudged a piece of bread toward him. He hesitated, then accepted it. Their hands brushed, and instead of pulling away, he let the touch linger. Margaret's eyes shimmered at the sight, the first voluntary gesture toward another child in months. Midway through the meal, Daniel spoke. Just one word. Looking at Ethan, he whispered, "Breathe." The room froze. Margaret's fork clattered against her plate. Emily blinked. Ethan smiled gently, nodding. "Yeah, buddy. Breathe." Margaret pressed a hand to her mouth, blinking rapidly. She had begged, pleaded, and paid specialists for a single word, and here it was, drawn out not by therapy or medication, but by the steady patience of a bike courier and his daughter's quiet presence. Later, while the children sketched in the living room, Emily sprawled with colored pencils, Daniel quietly mirroring her strokes. Margaret and Ethan stood by the kitchen counter. "You should know," she said quietly, "I've spent tens of thousands on specialists. A Swedish therapist who charged $30,000 a week. Renowned psychologists. None of them reached him." Ethan raised an eyebrow. Maybe that's the problem. They were all trying to reach him. Sometimes you just sit in the silence and let the kid invite you in. Margaret studied him, her defenses softening. "And where did you learn that?" He shrugged. "Emily. After her mom passed, she wouldn't speak for weeks. I tried everything. Finally, I stopped trying. Just sat with her. When she was ready, she came back." Margaret's throat tightened. "You're saying I've been smothering him?" "I'm saying maybe he doesn't need fixing," Ethan replied quietly. "Maybe he just needs space to remember he isn't broken." The words lingered, heavy and liberating all at once. Margaret turned to watch her son giggle softly as Emily handed him a blue crayon. A sound so small, yet so seismic, it shifted the ground beneath her. The evening ended with reluctant goodbyes. Daniel stood at the door clutching the drawing he and Emily had made. A tree with 2 figures beneath it. He held it as if it proved something he hadn't believed possible until tonight that as Ethan and Emily stepped into the elevator, Margaret caught his arm. Her voice trembled though her words were steady. "You don't understand what you've done. For him. For me." Ethan met her gaze, the city lights glinting against the glass. "I'm not a miracle worker, Margaret. I'm just trying to keep up with the world. Your son did the hard part. He chose to trust again." The doors closed, leaving her alone in the quiet luxury of her penthouse. But it didn't feel as empty anymore. In the silence, she clutched the truth Ethan had given her. That perhaps the strongest thing she could do as a mother wasn't to fight, or control, or dominate, but to kneel, to listen, to let her son lead. And somewhere between the flicker of Emily's laughter and Daniel's whispered, "Breathe," Margaret Hale began to believe in something she had not allowed herself in a very long time. Hope. For a week, things almost felt normal. Ethan would finish his courier runs, pick up Emily from school, and together they would take the subway uptown to Margaret Hale's penthouse. Daniel was waiting by the door now, sketchbook in hand, his guarded expression softening into something closer to anticipation. They painted together at the kitchen table or played simple games on the floor. Sometimes Ethan said very little, just tapping his chest and breathing slowly when Daniel's hands began to shake. Other times Emily filled the silence, her chatter bubbling like a brook, carrying Daniel along until his eyes weren't shadowed anymore. For the first time in months, Margaret could drink a cup of coffee without her stomach twisting into knots. For the first time in months, Daniel laughed. But New York has sharp edges, and nothing stays untouched for long. It started with a headline on a tabloid site. Power DA seen with mystery courier. Who was the man behind the penthouse door? Grainy photos had captured Ethan and Emily walking out of Margaret's building, Emily clutching Daniel's hand. The article speculated wildly. Was Margaret romantically involved with this blue-collar stranger? What did it mean for her political ambitions? Was Daniel being left in the hands of an unqualified outsider? By the next morning, Margaret's office buzzed with whispers. Her PR strategist, Victor Lang, wasted no time barging into her office, phone in hand. "Margaret, this is a disaster," he snapped, slamming the screen on her desk. "You're up for Deputy DA next year. Opponents will eat this alive. A bike courier with no credentials spending unsupervised hours with your son? It screams recklessness. Optics are everything." Margaret's jaw clenched. "Victor, that man saved my son's life. He's the only one Daniel responds to." Victor scoffed. "And that's touching, truly. But voters don't care about touching. They care about stability, credibility. You've built your reputation on control. This makes you look weak, desperate, irresponsible." "Responsible would have been losing him on a train platform?" She shot back, her voice like steel. "If protecting my son makes me look desperate, then so be it." Victor shook his head, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You don't understand the stakes. Keep him around, and you don't just risk your career, you risk custody." The words landed like a blow. "Custody? Yes, Spencer will seize this. You know he's been circling ever since the divorce. All he needs is proof you're unstable, and bringing in some courier instead of licensed professionals is the nail in the coffin." Margaret's hands tightened on her desk. "Spencer walked out on Daniel when he needed him most. He doesn't get to swoop in now and pretend to be the savior." Victor gave her a long look. "Then make sure you don't hand him the ammunition yourself." That evening, when Ethan arrived with Emily, the building's security guard blocked them at the entrance. "Sorry, Mr. Cole," the guard said awkwardly. "Orders from management. You're not cleared for entry anymore." Ethan frowned. "Since when?" "Since this morning." Emily clutched her father's sleeve, eyes wide. "Dad? What's happening?" Ethan exhaled slowly. He could have argued, but he knew this wasn't the guard's call. He turned, walking Emily back toward the subway. His daughter's voice was small. "Does this mean we can't see Daniel anymore?" Ethan's chest tightened. "It means people with suits and titles think they know better. But Daniel knows the truth. We'll figure it out." The next night, a knock sounded at Ethan's apartment door. He opened it to find Margaret standing there, her pristine suit wrinkled, her eyes red from exhaustion. She looked nothing like the unshakable DA who commanded courtrooms. "I couldn't let them cut you out," she said simply. "Daniel, he asked for you at dinner. He drew a chair and left it empty. He wouldn't eat until I told him you'd come back." Her voice cracked. "I'm not losing him again, Ethan." Inside, Emily sat cross-legged on the couch, sketchbook open. Daniel peeked from behind his mother, clutching another piece of paper. When he spotted Emily, his lips curved into the tiniest smile, and he hurried forward to show her his drawing. 3 stick figures holding hands. He pointed to the smallest one. "Me." Ethan felt something shift inside him, a weight both tender and terrifying. But the world outside their fragile circle wasn't finished. 2 weeks later, court papers arrived. Spencer Hale, Margaret's ex-husband, was filing for full custody. His argument was brutal. Margaret was unstable, prioritizing a delivery man's influence over professional care. He painted her as reckless, negligent, and emotionally unfit. And in court, the case drew headlines like moths to a flame. Margaret sat rigid at the defense table, her reputation on trial as much as her motherhood. Spencer's attorney wasted no time dragging Ethan's name into the dirt. "Mr. Cole is not a therapist, not a licensed caretaker. He is a bicycle courier with no formal education beyond high school. Yet the defendant entrusted her son's fragile mental health to this man. Ladies and gentlemen, this is negligence masquerading as maternal instinct." Margaret's stomach churned, but she held her composure. When her turn came, she rose and faced the judge, voice steady. "My son does not need more credentials in the room. He needs someone who sees him." Mr. Cole gave Daniel something no professional could: the freedom to breathe, to exist without being dissected. Then Ethan himself was called to the stand. He wasn't dressed in a polished suit, just his cleanest shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms, shoes worn but shined. He sat with the posture of a man who didn't want to be there but couldn't walk away. "Mr. Cole," the attorney sneered, "what qualifications do you possess to be responsible for a child suffering psychological trauma?" Ethan looked the lawyer dead in the eye. "None. I'm not a doctor, not a therapist. I'm just someone who knows what it feels like to be stuck in your own head. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes you don't need someone with a degree on the wall. You just need someone who'll sit with you in the silence until it's not so scary." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward. Spencer's attorney pressed harder, but Ethan didn't falter. Finally, Emily was allowed to speak. She held up Daniel's drawing, the 3 stick figures holding hands. "This is our family," she said simply. Her voice was small but unwavering. "Daniel drew it. He doesn't feel broken with us. He feels home." Silence filled the courtroom. Margaret's eyes brimmed with tears. Even Spencer's hard veneer cracked, just for a moment. The ruling came days later. Custody remained with Margaret. The judge's words were clear. Unconventional though it was, Daniel's well-being had visibly improved under Margaret's care and Ethan's presence. To remove him now would be cruel. Margaret exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. She turned to Ethan outside the courthouse, the flash of cameras blinding around them. Reporters shouted about scandal, romance, optics. Ethan ignored them all. Margaret, however, paused, her voice strong but tender. "Let them say what they want. I don't care anymore. Daniel is breathing again. That's all that matters." And for once, Ethan didn't argue. The weeks after the custody ruling brought a strange kind of peace. Daniel still had nightmares, still woke in the dark hours with his fists clenched. But the difference was he no longer faced them alone. Ethan would sit by his bedside, steadying his breath until Daniel slowed to match. Emily would bring her brother her stuffed rabbit, insisting he keep it for courage. And Margaret was learning, too, to put away the instinct to command, to let her son's healing unfold without forcing it. Yet peace in Margaret's world was never simple. The tabloids hadn't forgotten. If anything, the custody battle had made the story explode. The Courier and the DA blared one headline. "Mother or martyr?" asked another. Talk shows debated Margaret's judgment, some praising her bravery, others condemning her recklessness. Victor Lang stormed into her office one morning, eyes bloodshot. "Ty Askew, you've got to shut this down, Margaret," he said, slamming a stack of newspapers on her desk. "They're not just questioning your competence anymore, they're questioning your ethics. The mayor's office called. They're considering pulling you from the deputy DA shortlist." Margaret folded her hands. "Then they can pull me." Victor blinked, stunned. "Do you even hear yourself? You've worked your entire career for this. Don't throw it away over a courier and a personal sob story." Her voice was low, firm. "This isn't a sob story. This is my son's life. And Ethan Cole didn't just step in when no one else could. He showed me a different way to fight for Daniel. That matters more than politics." Victor stared at her, realizing for the first time he'd already lost the argument. Meanwhile, Ethan returned to his Courier runs, though something had changed in the way people looked at him. Some neighbors clapped him on the shoulder, whispering, "Saw you on the news. Good man." Others sneered, muttering about charity cases and DA's pet project. Ethan ignored them all. He wasn't chasing headlines. He just wanted to make sure Daniel kept breathing free. But Margaret wasn't content to stop there. One night, as the 4 of them shared takeout around Ethan's tiny kitchen table, Daniel carefully balancing a slice of pizza while Emily chattered about school, Margaret laid down her fork. "I've been thinking," she began, eyes flicking between them. "What if we created a place for kids like Daniel? Somewhere outside the clinics, outside the courts. Somewhere that isn't about treatment but about connection. Art, music, safe spaces. What you've done for him, Ethan, it shouldn't just end with Daniel. Other kids need this." Ethan frowned. I'm no founder, Margaret. I don't have the money or the degrees." Margaret leaned in, her gaze steady. "You have the heart. The rest I can handle." Emily grinned, pointing her slice at him. See, Dad? Told you you're a hero. Ethan rolled his eyes, but inside, something warm stirred, something that terrified him more than any courtroom. The idea grew faster than he expected. Within weeks, Margaret had secured an old community space in Brooklyn, quietly funded by anonymous donations. They called it the Haven, its walls filled with children's paintings, shelves stacked with instruments, corners set aside for quiet reflection. Ethan was there almost every day after his runs, guiding Daniel and other kids in messy, joyful projects. But the media wasn't done. When word leaked that Margaret Hale, rising star DA, was funding a non-professional therapy center with a Courier at its heart, the backlash roared louder than ever. Columnists called it irresponsible and a stunt. Political rivals sharpened their knives. The mayor's office demanded a public explanation. Margaret's staff begged her to distance herself, to deny, to salvage her career. Instead, Margaret called a press conference. The room overflowed, cameras flashing, reporters jostling. Margaret stood at the podium, hair pulled back, suit sharp, every inch the city knew. But when she began speaking, her voice was stripped of politics. "You all know me as a prosecutor," she said. "You know the cases I've tried, the victories I've fought for. But what you don't know, what I never intended to share, is that my son Daniel nearly drowned in silence after his father left. No amount of therapy, no amount of resources could reach him, until someone did. A man who had no credentials, no office, no title. Courier, a father, a neighbor, Ethan Cole." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Flashbulbs exploded. Margaret continued, unwavering. "I will not apologize for choosing what saved my child, and I will not apologize for building something that might save others. The Haven is not about politics. It's about humanity. If that costs me a position, so be it. Titles don't matter. My son's breath does." Questions flew. "Are you in a relationship with Mr. Cole? Is this charity just a cover for your political ambitions? What about accountability?" Margaret lifted her chin. "Accountability? Then hold me accountable for loving my son. Hold me accountable for standing beside people who choose compassion over credentials. But don't you dare call it negligence." In the back of the room, Ethan stood with Emily and Daniel. Emily's hand slipped into his, her voice whispering, "She's brave, Dad. Like you." He glanced at Daniel, who for once wasn't clutching his sketchbook to his chest. Instead, he held it open, showing a new drawing for stick figures. This time, Ethan was there, too. And for the first time in years, Ethan let himself believe. Outside, when the cameras finally lowered, Margaret found him. The city roared around them, sirens wailing, journalists still calling her name. But for a moment, the noise receded. "You didn't have to stand here," she said softly. "Neither did you," Ethan replied. Their eyes met. Not with romance, not yet, but with something sturdier. Respect, trust, a quiet vow that neither of them would let the other fight alone. Daniel slipped between them, tugging at Ethan's sleeve. "Home?" he asked. His voice small but clear. Ethan's throat tightened. He nodded. "Yeah, kid. Let's go home." 2 years later, the Haven was no longer just a reclaimed brick building tucked between bodegas and laundromats in Brooklyn. Its walls were alive with bright murals, its windows open to the sound of music and laughter. What had once been a fragile experiment had grown into the beating heart of the neighborhood. Inside, children crowded around a low table covered in paints. Emily, taller now, her hair still wild, leaned over 2 younger kids, showing them how to blend colors for the ocean. A volunteer badge hung from her shirt, reading Junior Mentor. In another corner, Daniel sat beside a boy his age, a guitar balanced across his lap. His hands moved with calm assurance, his voice steady as he taught chords he had once struggled to play himself. The shadows in his eyes had not vanished, but they no longer defined him. What remained was music and connection. Above them hung a framed drawing, Daniel's original sketch of 4 stick figures, now surrounded by dozens of other children's artwork. Some messy, some skillful, all stitched together into a collage that spelled out in bold letters. Home, Margaret Hale walked the halls with the quiet authority of someone who had chosen her path and accepted the cost. She had stepped away from the city's political ladder. The DA's office had long since chosen a safer candidate. Yet here, her presence carried a different kind of weight. Parents stopped to thank her. Children tugged at her sleeve to show drawings. Volunteers sought her advice. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Another invitation to speak. Another request to consult on community work. She ignored it, her eyes lingering on Daniel as he strummed the guitar. Her chest tightening with a gratitude words could never hold at the far end of the room. Ethan Cole straightened a bookshelf, a pencil tucked behind his ear. He had become the quiet backbone of the haven, never seeking recognition but present in every corner. Fixing pipes, hauling supplies, leading music circles when the staff was stretched thin. The city no longer called him a courier. To the children here, he was simply Mr. Ethan. Emily bounded up to him, paint splattered across her shirt. "Dad, we're out of brushes again," he sighed, shaking his head. "How do you go through 100 brushes in a week?" She grinned. "Because art is explosive. You taught me that." He laughed. Freer now, lighter. Margaret approached, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. She handed one to Ethan. Their hands brushed, and though no words passed, the silence between them was warm, familiar. The kind built not from sparks, but from battles weathered side by side. "You've built something real here," she said softly. "We built it," he replied. Outside, dusk settled as children gathered in the courtyard with instruments in hand. Tonight marked the haven's 2nd anniversary. Neighbors filled the benches, reporters scribbled notes, but the mood was not spectacle. It was community. Daniel stepped forward, clutching his guitar. His voice wavered at first. "2 years ago," he said, "I didn't talk much. I didn't feel much. But someone stayed anyway. My mom, my sister, and Ethan. They didn't give up even when I wanted them to. And now I get to help other kids not feel alone." The courtyard hushed. Margaret's eyes glistened. Ethan's throat tightened. Daniel strummed the opening notes of a song. Shaky, but sure. One by one, other children joined. Violins, drums, voices rising together beneath the Brooklyn sky. Laughter spilled over. Applause echoed against brick walls. For a moment, it wasn't about politics, or headlines, or titles. It was about breath. About belonging. Margaret looked at Ethan as the chorus swelled, her lips curving into something soft, almost incredulous. "Silent hero?" she murmured, just loud enough for him. Ethan shook his head, eyes fixed on Daniel. "Not anymore." The music carried into the night. And in that courtyard, in that unlikely sanctuary born of brokenness and courage, a family stood together. Not by blood, not by law, but by choice, a family that had chosen to keep breathing together. And that is the story of the Silent Haven. A sanctuary of broken souls. A reminder that even the quietest heroes can change lives forever. If the story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story we bring to life. Together, let's keep these stories breathing.